Good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, volume 3, on page 1475. We actually finished the paragraph on page 1475. I should also mention today is the Rebbe Marash's yahrzeit, Yud Gimel Tishrei. Rebbe Marash, of course, the father of the Rebbe Rashab, the author of Ayin Beis. So I'll just start with a little story that I heard, that when the Rebbe Rashab became Rebbe, it's the year Tofresh Mem Gimel. It was the year, the equivalent of 1842. No, I'm sorry. No. 1882. 1882. So it was right before Sukkot, and I'll share two stories actually, and then we'll learn. So the Rebbe Rasha was a very young man then. He was born in Tafresh Chaf Aleph. He was only 22 years old when his father passed away. And it was obvious the Chassidim gravitated to him to be the next Rebbe, even though he had an older brother. So for 10 years, he actually didn't formally accept the mantle. Some say out of deference to his brother. But regardless, so he still, he was considered Rebbe, and he said Maimorim, but he didn't allow himself to be called Rebbe, like when they called him up to the Torah and so on. In general, he was very discreet about whenever he would travel, he would never tell people who he was. He would do it. Even later years when he traveled with his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, it was the son that got sometimes an aliyah instead of his father, and he said he was so embarrassed his father sitting there and he's getting the aliyah because his father wanted to always be anonymous. Anyway, it was right after the passing of his father, within the year, and he was traveling to Europe, and he used to travel for health reasons, other reasons, to sometimes to Germany, mostly south of France, where it was warmer for his health. So he was in the shul Shabbos. Someone came over to him and said to him, "We hear, Shalom Aleichem, Vanakum Ta'id. Where's the Jew come from?" So he says he comes from Lubavitch. So they said, "Oh, we heard that there's a new Rebbe in Lubavitch. He's young, but they say he's a genius. He's a Yireh Shamayim. He's a true tzaddik." And they start saying all the praises of the Rebbe Rashab. And they said to the Rebbe Rashab, "Is it true? Is it true?" They didn't know that he's talking about him. They know he came from Lubavitch, so they're wondering. So the Rebbe Rashab responded, but he doesn't come close to his father. That's how the Rebbe Rashab responded. He didn't say no. He just says, but he doesn't come close to his father. I just thought it's a very telling story. And I'll tell one more story, and then we'll learn. Yud Gimel Tishrei was always very, very, all the special days was very precious, but especially Yud Gimel Tishrei. The Rebbe had seemingly a very strong affinity with the Rebbe Marash. And I remember many very powerful farbrengens. I could farbring about this for hours, but we don't have the time for that. So I'll just share a story. When the Rebbe Marash passed away, it was right before Sukkot. And those days, there was no text, there was no phones. There was in general no communication. The word had to spread word of mouth. So only in Lubavitch they knew, and then slowly the sad news spread in the neighboring towns. By the time it reached Chernigov, was a city, a very chashuv, a very distinguished city. The Rav there was Radatz Chaim, Rab David Tzvi Chaim. He was a famous rabbi, chassid, big chassid. His father was Peres Chaim, who was the only chassid actually that saw 6 Rebbes. When he was a little baby, he saw the Alter Rebbe, and when he was an old man, he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe as a baby. So he actually saw 6 Rebbes physically. They'd say about Peretz. But his son was the Rav, Rab David Tzvi Chaim. The news about the Rebbe Marash's passing came his Shiner Rabbah, because till it happened, Yud Gimel Tishrei, but it took around a week. And on Shana Rabbah, when they came to Shul, Shmini Atzeres night, before Hakafas and the dancing, someone told him, the Rebbe is Avek. The Rebbe left. It's a Yiddish expression, a respectable way of saying that the Rebbe's passed. They don't say passed, they say the Rebbe is Avek, he left. When he heard that, so the Radat, so Tzvichein fainted. He literally fainted. It was too much for him. And they couldn't revive him. As much as they tried, they brought a doctor, he was lying there in a heap, in Shul, in Chernigov, and nothing. It's getting dangerous. So they decided, you know what, Rab Peretz, his father, was still around. He just was already very old, and he was at home because he was not well. So they decided to bring him to Shul. Maybe he can get his son to wake up. Anyway, they brought him to Shul. He bent down to his son who fainted, and he whispered to him, he says, "A Rebbe geht kemel nicht avek." A Rebbe never leaves. That's what he told him. And as soon as his son heard that, he was revived. I'm sure he was still not exactly in the greatest spirits, but he revived, and they danced Simchas Torah and so on. I just thought a very powerful story about a Rebbe does not leave. So 2 short stories in honor of Yud Gimel Tishrei, and with that, let's learn his son, the Rebbe Rashab's Hemshech Ayin Beis. As I said, we're in the middle of page 1475, and let's sum up what we learned, and we'll continue. So, we're talking about Yichud, the unification and the exclusivity and the uniqueness of recognizing that the true reality of everything is godliness and God. But there are 2 levels, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah. Yichud Ilah is just absolutely only God, and everything else is completely nullified. And from God's perspective, it's only Atzmus. Yichud Tata, actually I should correct that, because Yichud Ilah is not just God's perspective, it's the perspective of the Ohr, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, that's completely bottled to Atzmus. Yichud Tata is Bitla Yesh, there is an existence, but the existence is aligned toward godliness. But from the perspective of Atzmus, he introduced now a 3rd dimension. They both are one. Because by Atzmus, there's no distinction, because there's the parsa, the concealment, which is also a power of Atzmus, does not conceal. Since there's no concealment, so these 2 levels are considered like one. They're both powers of Atzmus. They're one. Klulim Yachad, as he keeps saying those words, completely encompassed as one. However, the question then is, so why do we say Ani Rishon v'Ani Achron? Why do we talk about 2 levels of Ayin? Which means not just from our perspective, 2 levels, also from God's perspective. So his response is, his explanation is because God wanted from the outset, he wanted 2 levels of Ayin. However, initially, they come out, they're on the same level because they're both Atzmus, they're both powers of Atzmus. Then comes another force called the Tzmtzum and the Parsa that distinguishes between them. And to explain those 2 levels of Ayin, in other words, Yesh, Ayin, Yesh, the Ayin is not Ayin Ma'ayin, it doesn't come from Ayin. From the Yesh Amiti, there's 2 levels of Ayin. The Ayin breaks into 2. Why does it only say first 1 Ayin? Because both of them are encompassed together initially, and then it emerges. Now that one is the source of the other. And he gave an example of a mashpia and a makabel, that the mashpia has his seichel, la'atzmei. That's like the oil la'atzmei, the ayin of the yesh amiti. And then he has a seichel that he will diminish and will apply that seichel to his makabel, to his recipient, to his student. But before he does the tzimtzum, that seichel is also encompassed within his overall in mind, idea. However, there it's not nikr, like you could use the words. It's not nikr and nivdal. It's not discernible. It's all part of the teacher's mind. Then, when he chooses to want to convey it to a student, then comes a Tzmtzum. And that Tzmtzum will separate these two levels of Ayin. So from the teacher's perspective, that first level we're talking about, they're all one. And that's the Dugma Lamaila, that Gili Era Atzmus has two levels, Gili the Atzme, and the Beis, the Gili the Ed Tzedek Le'elamas, but initially they are one because they don't see, it's not discernible. And in that state, even the second level of Ohr, the Tzedek Le'elamas, for the purpose of existence, is also b'mayla madrega k'mei b'chinas ha'er shel ha'atzmei. It's on the same level quality and the same level as the Ohr, the Atzmus, which means the chitzenius is like the pnimius. Chitzenius here means it's not chitzenius yet because it didn't manifest, but it will be the energy that's going to relate to existence. So, but at this stage, the chitzenius and pnimius are all bound into one. Kol miyuchad mamish b'atzmusei. And the divine manifests the chitzenius because God wanting an Ohr that relates to existence is just as much as God wanting an Ohr that doesn't relate to existence. And as we said earlier, even koyach Tzmtzum is also a koyach of Atzmus, to conceal. Through the Tzmtzum, then comes the separation, and you can see now two tracks emerge, and now becomes a Ohr b'fnei atzmei and in a diminished state, because obviously the Ohr has to relate to the student, or in this case to the world, to existence. So it's not going to be the same intensity as the Ohr as it was in its source. The same Ohr, because in its source the focus is that it's God's power, and now it has to relate to existence. That's what we. That's where we stopped at the end of the chapter. I'm sorry, the end of the paragraph, middle of the page of page 1475. With that, let us continue. Unless somebody wants to ask something on this. Okay. Ready to continue. So, new paragraph, Tihine. And the pages and text, as always, can be found at ayinbeis.com. You have PDFs of all these pages, as well as all the earlier pages. V'hine, and now, v'hine, and now, zeu b'chinas klolos ha'er ha'shayach ha'elemis. So this is following what we just read, that after the Tzmtzum, there's now two levels of Ohr. The second level is the Klolos Ohr HaShayach LaElemus. Now we're talking about an Ohr that is already relating to existence. I always use the example of Yehi Ohr, Yehi Rakia Saramai Moris. Though here may be a higher level, and Malchus, as it goes into Biyah, we said earlier, is the Eisius Hadibur of God speaking, but it's a good way to visualize it. There's God saying, I want the Ohr that just reveals God's divine expression, and then there's the Ohr that is relating to existence. So it's called Klos Ohr HaShayach LaElemis, v'hainu da pnimius hu shelamay legamne b'chinas gili LaElemis. So Chitzenius HaOhr, he's defining now as being the Ohr that relates to existence. Now, why is it called Chitzenius if that's the Kavanah Pnimius? God wants it, and on the highest level, it's one exactly like the Ohr that reveals to himself. Why is it called Chitzenius? Because from the point of view of creating a world, the energy cannot remain in that level of intensity. So even though within the teacher, using the example, the intelligence that he's going to convey to the student within him, and before the Tzmtzum, it's all encompassed in his brilliance. But bottom line is, if he wants to communicate to the student, he has to diminish it. So for him, the diminishment doesn't have impact for the teacher, that is. For the student, it does have impact. That's why I said before, from the point of view of Seder Shtalshness and Elemis, there are two levels. And the second level is the level that relates to the student in the Moshel, and the Nimshel, the Dugma is the Ohr that's Shaykh Elemis. But the Pnimius, that's completely above Elamus. Even after the Tzmtzum, it remains something that is transcendent compared to the second level. Ubederech klal, the Rebbe Rashab adds, in general, hu b'chinas eresef hasevav kalam. After the Tzmtzum, it's generally the eresef hasevav kalam, the transcendent energy called sevav kalam, v'sharshe be'eresef shalifnei Tzmtzum, and its root, because remember we're talking now after the Tzmtzum. Its root is the eresef before the Tzmtzum, and before the Tzmtzum itself, in the Ohr legalis la'atzmai, as we learned earlier. Whereas mamala kalalman, the kav that enters and relates to existence, it's rooted also before the Tzmtzum, but before the Tzmtzum, the Ohr l'tzeirecha elamus. Except in the earlier stages, it's all bound together. It's the Tzmtzum that actually the divine light, the infinite divine light, recedes to allow these two energies to emerge in an active way, in an active and practical way. And the outer dimension is the Ohr of existence, of the worlds. Again, in the parentheses, and in general terms, this is mamala kalam, that's the permeating energy, the immanent energy that enters into existence, tailored, like we learned early in Ayin Beis, in the early, literally in the beginning, the difference between ratzon, the general desire that you have ratzon. So your ratzon is equal. You could want to walk, you can desire to think, you can desire to eat, you can desire to sleep. It's a ratzon clearly doesn't have any localized location in the human being. But then there's the koiches hanefesh. Like the power to see is in the eye. The power to hear is in the ear. Intelligence is in the mind. The koiches pnimi is already an Ohr pnimi that relates to the Keli, that particularly local container, and with all its definitions. The Ohr has to fit that particular container for it to function. So that's an example in the human being, difference between makif and pnimi, or sevav kalam and mamala kalam. Just to round it out. So now he's defined, that's the difference. Okay. Yeah. What threw me a bit is they made a new paragraph by Vihine. Now the Vihine, it's true, Vihine is usually a new subject, but the truth is you have to read it right after the words before it, where it said, because that's what he's referring to, that second level, which he calls chetzenis. Actually, I stand corrected. No, I think they did the right thing to make a new paragraph, because I may have not read it exactly accurately. Let me correct myself. Okay, well, regardless, it's definitely the publisher added the new paragraph. You could do it either way, but he's going to say something. I read it. Let me put it this way. What I read now is correct. The pshat that I just said is accurate, not changing it. But the context is a bit, is critical here. He's saying in general, the close er shachla elamis, that in Izelbchin's close er shachla elamis, that the chetzenius is generally the one that's shaykh to elamis, and the pnimius is completely removed from the elamis. What he calls b'derech klal, mamal kalam and seva kalam, respectively. But now he's going to say that's the way we generally understand it. Omnam, however, kan here in this mimer, in this discussion here, he's explaining it in a different manner, not contradiction, but in a different way. That what kana kavana here, the intention is, but that the Ohr and Keli in the Eilumis themselves, not that one relates to the Eilumis and one is above, sheyesh b'zeh beis madregas, that in the Ohr that is Keli, in the worlds itself, in existence, there are two levels. And why he's emphasizing this, we'll have to wait and see. But he's clearly making a distinction between saying completely removed from the worlds and in the worlds, which would be the two levels, after the Tzmtzum, obviously. Before the Tzmtzum, like he said, by the Eibishter, they're both klulim yachad, they're all encompassed as one. But now there is a distinction of chitzenius and pnimius, one is higher than the worlds. But he's saying in the Eilumis, in the Ohr Keli, in the Eilumis, there's two levels. Ha'echad, b'chinas ha'Keli, b'chinas hiskalus b'atzmus adayin. The Keli, that's still in a state that it's encompassed within the Atzmus adayin. And the second is how it gets revealed. Chutz la'atzmusei, it should become a mocker to the yesh. So what I think he means, and we'll see if I'm correct or not, but I would definitely say at this point that he's saying the following, that the two levels here, remember, he said that the second ayin is not coming from the first ayin. The second ayin is there, the initial, just like the students, just like the intelligence of the teacher that relates to the student is there from the outset. It's just concealed and not separate and not discernible. And then there's the next stage, the Tzmtzum, that makes it discernible and becomes an active force that relates to existence. So that's different than saying there's the pnimius, ha'or, that's higher than existence. Then there's the Ohr chitzenius that relates to existence. Even the chitzenius has a stage where it's like kol b'atzmusei, and then there's a stage how it comes outwards. In other words, what he's saying is, like I emphasized the other day, that he wants to connect not just the Ohr that's higher than existence to the divine essence, but even the Ohr that relates to existence, which ultimately is going to be the Ohr of the nefesh alikis as it speaks to the nefesh abamis, meaning it's tailored to and relates to existence, that even on the terms of existence, we could also trace our way back all the way to Atzmus, because Atzmus wanted the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. However, on the Atzmus level, it's all encompassed on the Atzmisdika level. And the Tzmtzum is what allows it to emerge. I believe that's what he wants to say here. Yeah, I'm almost sure that's what he wants to say. And that's the Kana Kavana, which he's been emphasizing all along, that it's two levels of ayin from the outset, from the initial, from its initial emergence, from its initial transmission from Atzmus. It's two levels of ayin. However, it goes first through a stage where it's all encompassed as one, and then separates into two. So that's what he's saying. She is echad. This Keli hashayich b'chinas hiskals b'atzmus adayin, which means the way it's still encompassed, the chitzenius encompassed in the pnimius, and there it's on the same qualitative level. Beis, as it emerges chutz la'atzmusei, which means after the tzimtzum, and now it's actually relating to be a source for the yesh. And now he's going to explain this further in the next section. But I'll stop here if anybody wants me to clarify any questions you may have. Yeah.
I have a question that no one else is going to ask. He talks about the chitzonius or first he says that he tries to say in general the pnimius is sovev and the chitzonius is mamale, but yeah, and but after the tzimtzum, to say that there's any chitzonius that's mamale, it's not exactly how we see it, right? We see above Atzilus as makif. It's like Atik and Archampin are from our perspective sovev, but he's calling them here makif because pnimi, because they're post tzimtzum. So then he has to say, okay, well, within this chitzonius of the Ohr, part of which he's calling mamale, actually no, there's part that is sovev that's separate, that's netak. It's still subsumed in it.
I'm confused there. I'm not clear what you're saying, to be honest. What?
I'm sorry. Well, first of all, it's really early here, but what I'm saying is he calls one aspect, the chitzonius, as in general mamale, but he's including in that atik and arich necessarily.
So first of all, where do you see he mentioned atik and arich?
Well, but you're talking pre-Tzmtzum and post-Tzmtzum, and atik and arich are post-Tzmtzum. So
where do you see the words atik and arich? He's not even mentioned it. Why bring that in here?
Because we have to still relate it to the Seder Ishtashalus. I mean,
so he's speaking the words seviv kalam and malakalam. That's the words he uses. He didn't use atik and arich, so I just wouldn't bring it. It just confuses matters. But what you're referring to atik and arich as seviv? Is that what you mean? If you call it seviv, then that's seviv kalam. That's the.
I know. We see it that way, but here he's suggesting that they are in the klalos. He's saying that they're chitzonius. That's what I.
Where do you see that he calls seviv kalam a chitzonius?
Well, he doesn't talk about seviv kalam. All right. Well, I'll take it offline. I was trying to relate it as what does it mean to have a chitzonius of or pnimi of the or shekol batzumso? Is that what he's saying? That the chitzonius?
No. The two levels of Ohr, the one that the Ohr la'atzmai, and the Ohr connecting to existence, he's calling pnimis and chitzonius Ohr. That's all he's saying. Initially, they're all one because they're all encompassed, and the Tzmtzum allows you to discern and see them as two. The two tracks, in general, is seviv kalam and mamala kalam. And that's rooted before the Tzmtzum. That's all he's saying. That's nothing more, nothing less than that.
I thought he was saying there were two types. In the last sentence, there were two types of, two levels within the...
he's saying that. The whole example was that even the Ohr HaShayach LaOlamus, or the seichel that the mashpia is giving to the student, initially, it was all encompassed in the seichel of the teacher in general, and there you couldn't distinguish between the two. And then the Tzmtzum allows you to distinguish between the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to give it more thought, but thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to take us off track.
Okay. Are there any other questions on what we just learned? Okay. So now we continue. It says, Va'inyan hu. The inyan in this is in Nemuvam Ba'ageres HaKedesh, Siman Chaf, it's understood in the Ageres HaKedesh, the famous Ageres HaKedesh 20, that was referred to many times throughout Ayin Beis. So it's moving from there, in there. Be'inyan de'iyu v'gamui chad. So there he discusses the central point in that letter in Tanya is the expression from Zohar, Iyu v'chayu ichad, Iyu v'gamu ichad. Iyu, God, Iyu, you are one with your energies and you're one with your containers. And he begins asking the question, what does it mean to be one with the containers? And he explains, this is a language from Ageres HaKedesh, that Iyu v'gamu ichad means he's one with his containers. Livrei bohem v'al yodam, because he uses these containers as instruments. These are his instruments that behem, with them and through them, is the creation ma'ayin liyesh. Let me just explain what, and let me read one more line. The b'chinas iyu zeu b'chinas pnimi, hamislabish ba'keli. So you say iyu v'gamu yichad, you're saying ihu, you, the pnimi, the divine energy that manifests in the containers, in the container of Chachma, the container of Bina, the container of Das, container of Chesed, Vura. So then we have some semblance and some logical way to understand the process of creation. Of course, as we always mention, God can do it like this, poof. He wants a creation is a creation. But he wants it to make sense as much as possible. So he does it like an artist does it. He takes his creative energy and manifests it in the easel, which he will then paint on the canvas. So the Eibusher didn't just say, let there be a world, and the whole world comes into being. He says, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, Yehi Ohr, Yehi Rakia. He uses 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and its different configurations and permutations and combinations make up the letters, like he says in Shar Yichud V'Amunah. Each combination, they're channels. What do letters do? Letters channel a seamless energy into some type of form and structure. Think of a projector of white light. Projector of white light, you'll have on the screen, you'll have white light. But if you want to have a structure, you need to put a filter. You need to put a film in between the light and the screen. So the film channels the images or the letters, and suddenly now you'll see letters of light. Aleph, Beis, Gimel. To create a structured existence, the Eibusher, how he did it was he created Kelim. It's his Kelim, it's his instruments. But the Kelim have definition. The Ohr relatively does not have definition. Well, definitely the higher levels for sure now. And then the Ohr is somewhat tailored and channels through the Kelim. Ubahem va'yodam is ma'ayin liyesh. Livrei bahem va'yodam ma'ayin liyesh. Iyu is the Ohr pnimi that enters into the containers. So he's saying, from what we learned there in Ageres HaKedesh, it's understood the b'chinas ha'era mislabja b'chinas Malchus hu b'chinas moka lahavas. That the Ohr that manifests in Malchus is already in a state that it's a mocker. It's no longer an Ohr that's completely removed from existence. It's turned into a source to create. There's now a parentheses. I just want to make sure it doesn't confuse matters. Let me just see how long it goes. Okay, I'll try to read it without, hopefully doesn't disturb the flow, but we'll try to get through it. So what he's doing now, the Rebbe Rashab is coming to explain the point that he's making here, that even the Ohr, as it manifests in existence, did not begin there. It began on a higher level. And that's what he's emphasizing here. We'll soon see how it all comes together. I hope we'll see, to be very honest. But it sounds like we will see it. So he's using the Ageres HaKedesh to explain it. So far he said that the Ageres HaKedesh explains the idea of how the Ohr manifests in the Kelim, and that specifically is the Ohr mislabish and Malchus to be a moker lahavis. In the parentheses, he qualifies and says, "U'b'moker macher." Elsewhere, it says, "Shezeu b'chinas yichud zo Malchus," that the iyu v'garmu yichad is the yichud of zo Malchus. The ihu zeu b'chinas zo. When you say you are one with your containers, iyu is za, hainu b'chinas ha'ohr de za, the ohr of za, u'b'derech klal b'chinas za ikre b'chinas eris. In general, za, the mides, the mashpia, is in general primarily a level of ohr, of energy, u'kamei shazah rubech sodim. Like we know that za, even though it has 6 mides, but it's Rubei, it's primarily, the dominant is Chesed. Azal l'kuliyem, Chesed azal l'kuliyem. That's the prominent and dominant gene, so to speak, of the Midas. Chsodim in general is Ohr. Gvura in general is Tzmtzum, is concealment, Din. So remember, whenever you create something, You need to have Ohr and Keli. Think of an author. I gave the example of an artist. The Ohr is the very creative energy. Without that, nothing is created. The Keli gives it shape and form. Maybe even easier to understand as an author. An author has an idea, but the idea has to come down into words, into letters, into sentences, paragraphs, phrases. So the Ohr is the idea, and the oisius and the tevis, the letters and the words, and is the expression of the idea, the channels, if you wish. Like I gave the example with the white light and the film. So Hashem, God also creates in that fashion. So he's saying what we said before, that the Ohr, Panimi is mislabish bekelim in Malchus. So in another place it speaks about it more, breaks it down further, that it's Zah in Malchus. The Ohr is Zah, shemisyachid im chinas hamalchus. This Ohr of Zah, Zah, think of the mashpia, or like the sun, becomes united with Malchus. Lahavis ma'ayin liyesh, to create biyah ma'ayin liyesh. So Zah and Malchus is mashpia makabel, like ish ve'isha, husband and wife, and Malchus is the feminine, Zah is the masculine. Together they create ma'ayin liyesh. And you need both. You need the seed and you need the keli, the womb. So together it creates. The publisher's note below suggests that the parentheses ends right here, which is most likely correct. Because he just adds in the parentheses a little more detail about the process of the Ohr and Keli interacting with each other. But now he goes back. Al-Zehu Seder Ishtalshel is the Esesphere is the Atzilus. And this is the overall understanding of the Seder Ishtalshel, the cosmic order of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Liyas b'chinas hamshachas ha'er memadrega lemadrega. So what does Seder Ishtalshelus mean? The very word Ishtalshelus means an evolution of levels. It comes from the word shalshelis, a chain of events, a chain of a hierarchy. So there's the higher levels, like Chochmah is the higher. From Chochmah goes to Bina, from Bina to Das, to Chesed, to Gvura, and so on. So that's what's the general role of this Ishtalshelus, that the Hamshakas Ha'er from higher levels should go Madrega lemadrega. They should get diminished level by level, Ad Shiyiyeh be'erech liyas mokeh liyesh, to the point that they are now, the energy has been diminished enough that it can now be channeled properly to become a mokeh liyesh in Malchus. So the Rebbe Rashab is going back now and explaining the whole process of how we get from the highest levels of the divine, where things are seamless, into a structure where things become pnimi, what he calls chitzenius ha'er, the Ohr that is commensurate to existence. We'll soon see how he brings it back and connects it all to everything we've learned. But he's clearly giving us a whole overview of the process and wants to show that the lowest end of the process is obviously connected all the way to these highest levels. But we'll get to that soon. So right now he's just explaining the process and of how it goes from level to level, which makes total sense. When a teacher has to teach the students, he begins with his own intelligence, and then slowly he goes step by step until he's able to convey it to students, and each student according to their level. So there's a hishtalshelus always going on in any process. That's a healthy process. And if you skip steps or you miss steps, then the process will be compromised. A healthy process is exactly that. Every step is accounted for. Think of a chain that's missing a link, or think of steps or rungs on a ladder missing a rung. You want to have the exact amount of rungs to be able to go. For here's going from the top down to create. Obviously, in Aveda, it's from the bottom up, the same idea. But right now, he's talking the creation process. So that's so far what he said. Clearly, he's developing an idea here. So we're smack in middle. But I want to make sure that every piece here is understood. So if anybody wants to clarify anything, by all means. But we haven't finished it. He's in the middle of developing it all. And I see he's bringing a lot of ideas from earlier on in Ayin Beis. Okay. I assure you that we will get clarity here, even if it may be a little confusing now as he's beginning to elaborate on this. Like, what's his point? What's he trying to explain? But it's gonna come tied together. So, okay, if you're not yet seeing it, be a little patient and you'll see how it emerges. Any questions so far, what we've learned? Okay, so the Ohr is going level by level until it goes into the Kelim. Now continuing. So this is a classic Rebbe Rashab. This is going to get more complex before it gets clarity. Now we learned earlier, it was explained earlier, and he brings the Maimer Dibra Maskul Mereish Tzurim. This takes us back all the way to volume 1, as they mark down below. Volume 1, page 291 and on. So what did we learn there? The Bishtalshlus Ilav Olol, the Esesphiris, yes, Beis Madregas. That the spheres in their hierarchy and their process of Ishtalshlus, and use the word Ilav Olol, which is clearly Yesh Miyesh, because the spheres themselves, like he explains in Ageres HaKedesh, are not Yesh Ma'ayin. Chochmah and Bina, and the same thing Chesed and Gvura, even Zohar and Malchus, you use Yesh Ma'ayin from Atzilus to Biyah, but in Atzilus itself, it's called the Seder Shtalshus of the Esser spheres themselves. Ilav Olol, cause and effect. The Moichin, contemplation, gives birth to Midas, as we learned earlier, that they are commensurate to each other. They're different entities, but they're not completely Yesh and Ayin as in non-commensurate levels. They are related to each other. So what do we learn about this Ishtalshlus? That there's 2 levels in this Ishtalshlus. So as I said, the plot thickens. It gets a little more intricate here. What are the 2 levels? Mashul Itzedach Atzilus. Then Atzilus itself, Atzilus has also needs. To create Atzilus, you need to go from Chochmah to Bina, to Das, to Chesed, to Gvura, to Feres, to have a full entity called Atzilus, a structure. But then there's another aspect. Mashul Itzedach Biyah. This spheres, as they evolve, are also going to be needed to create the next worlds. Biyah, Bri Yitzir Asiyah. So in a sense, when you talk about the spheres and Atzilus, you can talk about them when we talk about the spheres within themselves, or to create another. I'll just give an example. Are we talking about a teacher teaching students that are relatively on a higher level, the world of Atzilus, and conveying to them an idea? Or is it teaching them and training them that they should teach people, students of theirs, who are far lower level? So the 2 things are happening at once. When you train students, you're teaching them to understand things, but you're also training them that they should be able to teach as they become teachers in the next stage of the process. So he's saying that in the Hishtalshus of the Elav Olol of the Esser Spheres and Atzilus, there's 2 levels. There's what is necessary for Atzilus itself, which of course is a higher level of a higher process, a higher level of expression, and there's what is necessary for the creation of Biyah. Now, why is that relevant here? We shall soon see why he's bringing that here. Okay, the Letzerech Atzilus Atzmei Hakolu B'chinas Hadvekus. The spheres, as they are interacting and feeding each other, in this process that we're talking about, everything is in a form of dveikus. They're all attached. They all bond with each other because they're all commensurate to each other. It's all in the same world. So even though it's not biyah yet, it's only preparing for biyah. But the spheres, as they are going to be used in order to create yesh ma'ayin biyah, there, even the ilav olol of the spheres is, relatively speaking, havdalah. It's not the same level of dveikus. Achu be'erech liyez b'bchinas moker, to the point that Atzilus should be primed and ready to become a source for biyah. To go back to my example that I was giving, when you're teaching students, there's a stage where the whole purpose is that they should understand the teacher well. Then there's another stage. Let's take a medical school. The stage where you're teaching them to now perform, let's say, surgery. So then you have to train them how to interact with others. It's not them just receiving the teachings from their teacher. That's dveikus. But then they're trained how to communicate these ideas to others. And now they have to start thinking about the other. And that requires a different type of mindset. One is more absorbing what the teacher is teaching. And the other is still absorbing, but being trained how to use it outside of themselves, outside of the classroom, outside of the school, when they will go out on shlichus, wherever they go, and use what they've just learned. So in Atzilus itself, both things are happening. There's L'tzerech Atzilus, that's so-called the students as they are in the presence of their teacher. And then the students who are being trained by the teacher to go out of Atzilus into Biyah and do the work that they have to do there. So both things are necessary, and they're two different aspects, two different dimensions in Atzilus itself. So what he's explaining here is obviously more detail what we're learning of how the Ohr, coming from these highest levels, ultimately goes through stages till it becomes an actual mocker, where it can relate to existence. But it's still rooted all the way in the highest levels, which I'm sure he's going to get back to, or hopefully. Okay. As written elsewhere at length, this whole idea. I'll stop again for any questions. Now I think he's going to bring it back to what we learned earlier. Thank God. Yeah. Because knowing the Rebbe Rashab, you can start developing this into so many different directions, and then you have to keep focused on the point of departure, make sure we don't get lost in the woods here. But it looks like he's going back now to the beginning of the topic. So far, so good. Everybody following? It's a build-up here. Okay. Now the Rebbe Rashab adds, V'yesh lemer, and we can say, the mitchila, in the beginning of this whole process, hu beze fane hamshachas me'en sei baruch hu. He's going now back, so-called, to where it all originates. The beginning is two forms of hamshachas from Ein Sei Baruch Hu. Like he said, it's two. God has two wishes here, so to speak, or two transmissions that he wants to transmit. And what are they? V'hainu, and that is b'chinas harotzen, b'chinas izgalus Ohr. Loyli is b'chinas makal yesh. His desire that there should be a divine expression. Remember the field of energy, Ohr. That is not a makal yesh. He wants to be expressed. He wants the divine in its pure form, not commensurate and not relating to the yesh, to be revealed. And what does he want there? He wants everything to be in one utter seamless unity. A state of bittul b'mitzias where there's no other consciousness or identity. That is the level of Ichudillah. That's one hamshacha from Ein Sof that Atzmus desires. And the second that he desires is Vaharot. The number two is Vaharotzen. The desire bizgalus Elias b'chinas mokar liyesh. He wants to have an Ohr that will be commensurate and will serve and relate and be a source for the yesh. In other words, it didn't happen, like I said earlier, incidentally, or once that Ohr is there and that Ohr gets diminished, then it becomes a source. No, from the outset, from the initial plan in Atzmus, these are the two expressions that he wants. They will go through stages and they'll need a Tzmtzum to actualize, but that's the Rotzen Elyon. And there, he wants b'chinas makal yesh ushiyah b'bittul b'chinas yichud tata, and there he wants a bittul hayesh of Yichud Tato, that there is an existence, not bittul mitzias, and that existence is permeated and aligned with godliness. B'shneim, and both, heim, hamshacha b'bchinas Atzmus ein sof. Both of them are a transmission from Atzmus ein sof, u'miyichodim heim b'bchinas Atzmus, and they're united and integrated or unified in b'bchinas Atzmus, ad she'enim nikorim v'nivdalim zeh mizeh, klal, to the point that you cannot distinguish and separate between them in any way. Because when you think of it from Ratzon Hashem's point of view, God wants it. Why would one be different than the other? They're just two aspects of God's Ratzon. This dimension, that dimension. And in that stage, they're all united as one, as we learned earlier. And now, as I said, he's explained it more, especially taking it all the way down into Seder Shtalshlus. Ukanal, b'bchinas chitzenius u'pnimius. Next page, 1476. Like we discussed earlier, the outer dimension and the inner dimension. Sheba chitzenius b'chinas hagili u'kamei ba'pnimius. From this perspective, the chitzenius, what he means here, chitzenius, what will become chitzenius, will become the energy that is more of an outer energy that will relate to existence. Its gili is like the pnimius. He said before, even it's on the same Milo Madrega, the same quality. So what do we take? What do we derive from this? So Kamoy Cain. That's how it is from the highest levels. So same thing. Hagili lahavas hayesh. The gili to create the yesh, which goes through the spheres of Atzilus, through Malchus, who meyuchad ba'atzmus ein sof kamoy b'chinas hagili shalamayla mi'esavus. So the gili to create the yesh is miyuchad, is one, is unified with Atzmus Ein Sof, just like the gili that's higher than creation, higher than Isavus. The Atzmus Ein Sof, because everything is equalized by the fact that it's the Ratzon of Atzmus Ein Sof. That's the dominant aspect. The specifics is already how it's going to manifest, but that they both are, Atzmus wants it. It's like just to use a language from the Kutei Torah, that even if he commanded us to chop wood, it would be exactly the same as putting on tefillin or doing a mitzvah. He didn't choose that because Ratzon Hashem is the only thing that matters here. We're not talking about the structure. We're not talking about the product. We're talking about the producer and his intentions. And it's through the Tzmtzum, this other force called the concealment. That's where they'll become separate and the nivdalim separate and distinguishable one from the other. So, of course, you could ask the question, what did he add in this whole last piece that we didn't know before? Well, firstly, he brought it back into Atzilus and the whole Seder Shtalshlus. That was not really said before. Secondly, he's elaborating. He's showing how the whole thing plays itself out in the whole Seder Shtalshlus from the highest levels. And most importantly, the Kamoy Cain is a critical one. It's not just there's two forms of Ohr, it's also that the power of creation, which you could say is not the same thing as the Ohr that's higher than creation, is one with Atzmus. Now, this is all based on the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, and we'll understand its significance when we bring it back to understanding how the Nefesh Elikis will train the Nefesh Abamis to love God. Because all this is part of the Shema and Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Leilam Vod of Yichudei La, Yichudei Tata. So one thing is Yichudei La, that's Bittul Mitziyas, but we want to have a Bittul that also permeates and saturates and is completely integrated into existence, not just one that's beyond existence. So that's why he's explaining how that lower so-called level is really all the way is connected to the highest from Koyach Atzmus, just as the higher level, which, as I said, is a whole new dimension. It's not just Yichud Tata and then you get to Yichud Ilah. It's actually a point where Yichud Tata and Yichud Ilah become unified due to Atzmus. Yeah. And I think
Rabbi
here
Jacobson, is it? Oh, sorry.
I'm going to take questions. 1 minute. I think I'm going to stop here. But let me take questions. Any questions?
Could the practical lesson of what one of the points he's trying to make is that at that level that there's no difference between chopping wood and putting on tefillin, it teaches us the lesson that even if we're chopping wood down here, as long as we're doing it with the correct kavanah, we're doing it and directing it towards godliness, we can achieve, if not the same, but pretty high levels of godliness and be able to connect to the Atzmus itself, ultimately. But we just have, so in other words, we have to be able to harness that energy and kavanah. What do you think?
We're going to discuss it at length later when he gets back to Nefesh L'kis, Nefesh Abamis. He's going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this much more. Yeah, the point is that we want to connect to the highest levels, but we want to connect it to our existence as well. So, yes, that's exactly where he's going with this.
It's a little bit of a paradox because we typically think of the Shema, for example, Yichud Ilan, and then Baruch Shem Kavod, Yichud Tata, and that there are two separate levels of Yichud. But here there's an implication that if you accomplish Yichud Tata with Baruch Shem Kavod, basically nullify yourself to the Creator, but not one with the Creator. You are, just by doing that, one with the Creator. There's a paradox.
That's not necessarily correct, but what you said.
No?
That's not what he's saying here.
There's an implication.
As I pointed out, the process is going to be first Yichud Tata, which is lower than Yichud Ilah. Then comes Yichud Ilah. Then comes a third level where you get beyond Yichud Tata and Yichud Ilah. But from the perspective of our avodah, we begin on our terms. And whatever that may be, it could be Shalai L'Shma even. You do something for ulterior motives. The bottom line is you're aligning yourself with God. Then you go to deeper levels of bittul. And then you go to even a third level that he's ultimately leading us to, where they become like one. But you can't get to this one without first going through the lower levels. So whether in the Pnimius of Bitla Yesh, ultimately there is a connection to the highest, there is, but it's not on our terms. So we have to get there. And for that, we need to climb. And we need a lot of avodah and a lot of work to get to that. Conceptually, of course, it all began from there. But the point is, for us to experience it, we have to climb the ladder. Just like the Ishtalshlus, as he says here, goes step by step. We also have to go step by step as we retrace the steps.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to find a shortcut. I was just saying a little paradoxical because from his perspective, it's all one.
Yeah, but we're not. What you talk? If you're talking avodah, it's not from his perspective; it's from our perspective.
Exactly. I'm with you.
Now the fact that a ish pashut, a simple person who comes into shul Rosh Hashanah like the farm boy, and doesn't know how to read, and cries out kukriku with his innocence and simplicity, and touches the deepest levels of Atzmus, yeah, we have that. Obviously, there's that aspect, because for Atzmus, a simple cry like that can be as deep and even deeper than the greatest avodah of the biggest tzaddik of Moshe Rabbeinu and the biggest tzaddikim that ever existed. But that's not the Tmidin Kesidron. That's not the regular, we're not training ourselves to be farm boys. That's because there's an etzem hanefesh that can reach. The goal here is that it should be integrated. The farm boy, hopefully after that, went to school and was taught, and then learned also to develop it also internally. So it's a connection. So we're not talking now about the cry of the etzem. That is deserves its own discussion. Here he's talking about the process, and we haven't even gotten to the avodah. I'm mentioning it only because I want to make sure we understand where this is headed. But right now he's still speaking about the Yichud Eloi, Yichud Tatov, and now he's come to this third level of joining the union of them both. And that will then bring us back, and then we'll probably be already in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, not Ayin Beis any longer, where he's going to bring it back and say, okay, based on that, let's now go after you know what the hisbonus of Shema and Baruch Shem, Yichud Eloi, Yichud Tatov, or Hashem Elokeinu, and Hashem Echad. Let us now go and say that leads to V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. So we're going to still get back there. We're not there yet, but this is definitely leading there. And as you see, we already turned to page 1476. There's only a page and a half left there. But he's going to continue this discussion of understanding this union. I also have a question I've always had, not a question, I always remember when the Rebbe Rashab, his talkus, in Tafresh Pei, Beis Nissen, so in Ashkafta the Rebbe, which is like a Yoman, a diary written by Reb Moshe Rifkin, Moshe Dov Ber Rifkin, he wrote a diary of all the events that transpired before the Rebbe Rashab's passing. So one of the things he writes is that middle of the night, I think it's the night before the Istalkus, in the middle of the night, the Rebbe Rashab was heard in his sleep saying the following words, Anashama Gate Eis, from the Chibur, from Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. That's what he said. And neshama expires, and neshama is like melting away, completely being dissolved in the union of Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. Those are the words he said. And, obviously a Rebbe is saying things like that is itself quite powerful. But when we read this, and this is Ayin Beis, and the conclusion of Ayin Beis, his magnum opus, you start getting maybe a taste of what he was experiencing or referring to, especially in the last minutes or last hours of his life on this earth. Just adds a whole different dimension. I have to go back and see the exact language, but I'm almost sure that's the words that he used. And as I said, I've always registered it, but I never fully reading this. You start seeing this highest level, this union of Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata. But look, let's not jump ahead of ourselves. If we had Yichud Tata, we'd also be quite an achievement. Yichud Elah is completely a level that is not accessible to most. And the joining of the two is the ultimate. So we have to definitely find how it is on a microcosmic level for each one of us. But just also, we have to also be honest and realize that we're talking here extremely high levels of experience. I'm not talking about the intellectual academic part. I'm talking about the avodah part of look how hard it is just to refrain and to control our some of our temptations and some of our impulses. That so the first step is trying to do as much as we can. Mm-hmm. Then we'll talk about these higher levels. But nevertheless, we are being given a gift here, as the Rebbe Rashab is explaining these levels, and we'll make it through. So I'm going to stop here. 3 lines on top of page 1476. Any other questions? I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, when the Rebbe said
this will be our last class before Yom Tov, and then we'll resume, as I said the other day, a week from Tuesday. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, when the Rebbe says here the level of Or, what's Gilu Liatzmo or Gilu Olamos, or to Acherim, right? That was a makor for others. And then he uses the term there that the first level, which is the level of not as a makor for the Olamos. And I think you once used the interesting mashal about a person clarifying his thoughts for himself versus clarifying his thoughts to give a speech to others. And I was wondering how, if you're just clarifying your own thoughts for yourself with no intention of giving it out to others, how could that still be considered a bittul b'mitzias? Or is that analogy not applied to this, what the Rebbe says here? you would think the clarification, even for yourself, the agilui for la'atzmai would not be considered bittul b'mitzias, because it's the whole idea is to put some type of structure even for yourself within it.
Well, you're talking in the muscle, or you're talking in the nimshal? In the muscle, the teacher is the comparison to godliness.
Right.
The teacher is like God. So this is God manifesting in a consciousness. Remember, God does not need consciousness or awareness or expression. The Gidul Atzmei is God choosing to create a state, a field of energy that is completely consumed with divine consciousness. Is complete bittul mitzias. We're not talking about a teacher clarifying an idea for himself. We're talking about a teacher manifesting that there should be a consciousness in the nimshal. In the mashal, it's the teacher as he is for himself, not as he is relating to others. So we're not talking about defining the seichel for himself, because lamaila, the whole thing is a chiddush. In a human being, indeed, you can't really say that completely, because a human being is a created entity. But if you really think about it, what we're talking here is about a divine level that just, the mashal for it would be the teacher as he is learning for himself. And there the goal is just his own awareness of his own being and his own understanding of it. Not the structure of it per se.
Okay. And my other question is a more general question, is that the Rebbe here spoke about that it's the Zohar and Malchus becomes the Yesh Mi'ayin, gives birth to Yesh Mi'ayin. I was wondering, will the Rebbe get to before we end here, or maybe I've missed it, but I don't think I have, where we finally get Chumius from Ruchnius, which is, I would assume, that's the inyan of Zohar and Malchus in the Olam HaAsiyah, that the materialism only is created at the last final step in Olam HaAsiyah.
I don't think he's going to go there, because he's not interested. It's not his theme here. He's not discussing here how the Gashmius is created. That's not the point in Ayin Beis here. So I don't see why he would go there. It's more in your interest. So there are Maimarim that talk about that, but that's not here.
I see.
I don't think Rabbi Rashab is going to discuss that here.
Because isn't that the ultimate question? I mean, how everything is.
That's why Chassidus has thousands and thousands of pages. It can't address every page, the ultimate question. There are a lot of ultimate questions. But if this is a piece that you want to learn about, there are Maimarim that talk about it.
What could you refer me to one specific one that might be a classic to learn on that?
Well, I'd have to clarify your question more. You want to talk about how Gashmis is created? That's Ageres HaKedesh 20. There he talks about how the Yesh HaNivra can only come from the Yesh HaMiti. If you want to talk about purely how you can create a Yesh, only Atzmus can create a real Yesh. If you're talking about the process of how the Ohr gets diminished more and more, that still does not necessarily, Ruchnius, as much as you diminish it, will not become Gashmis. Right? So you need to have a power of Atzmus. So I'm not sure what aspect you're talking about. If you're talking about that power of Atzmus, that's Ageres HaKedesh 20, and some Maimarim that discuss it, Tafshin Zayin, a few other places. If you're talking about the combination of the process, I don't know if it talks anywhere all the different aspects of it. It's a combination of different Maimarim. So I'm not sure what you're looking for exactly.
It's known in transportation in Yonim that you can send a package from here to Israel, but the hardest thing is what's called the last mile.
So I just told you in Ageres HaKedesh, the Ruchnius, as much as you diminish it, will never become Gashmius. Right. That's not the last. The last mile will require the power of Atzmus to create a real Yesh that does not feel it has a source. Ruchnius can never, from Ruchnius, you cannot create Gashmius.
So then how to...
So really, to be fair to everybody, this should be, we should talk about this separately from this class. It has nothing to do with what we're learning here right now at all.
Got it. Okay.
It's a good topic. It's fundamental. not in any way minimizing. But let's just go back here, and I don't want to confuse matters. So what we summed up here is that the process of how the air goes level by level by level till it's ready to be sourced for the yesh in its root, it all rooted in Amshacha from Atzmus, which is one, together with the other Ratzon that Hashem has for an Ohr that should be completely the Yichudei law. That's not a Mokal Yesh. Both of them, he calls them Ratzon the Atzmus Ein Sof. And it's the Tzmtzum that actualizes this distinction. So we're going to stop here.